Why don't we get started? And as we may pick up a few people as we get just past 7. Thanks for coming, everybody. I know most of you are return visitors to Township Issues. This is our second Township Issues Zoom meeting. First one was on budget, and it's online if you want to take a look at that one if you were not able to be with us that night. This one will be recorded as well. Walter's going to record it for us, so we'll have it available later if you want to go back and look at some of the slides or something like that. So anyway, tonight's topic is Incorporation, a solution in search of a problem. And I thought what I would do is to start out tonight, there's been a few questions just about who we are, Township Future. And I know many of you do know who we are, but just as a reminder, we are a political action committee. We formed earlier this year to provide voters an alternative to the entrenched political machine which has dominated our elections. And we are led by a steering committee. It's comprised of myself, Walter Cook, Rob Johnson, Kira Becker, Bob Lilac, and Ted Stanley. And those are all active, smart, intelligent people. So we're very lucky to have such a community-minded and dedicated group on our steering committee. What we care about: giving all residents of the Woodlands a voice, supporting local businesses and nonprofits, supporting candidates in nonpartisan elections only, such as the Woodlands Township, those who have a history of community service and are committed to fact-based decision-making. And in fact, our 3 candidates that we've endorsed for the upcoming elections do have all of those characteristics. We have no involvement at all in partisan politics or elections. Our emphasis is on community. And we do care greatly about protecting and enhancing the quality of the Woodlands. We stand for low taxes, limited government, and excellent services. We stand for independence. We do not answer to anyone, including any political groups or contributors. We stand for giving residents the facts that they need to make informed decisions on candidates in nonpartisan elections and on issues such as what we're doing here tonight. We stand for holding the township board members accountable to their promises to the law and to the residents. And we stand for civility and courtesy in our discourse. Some claim that we're the Back to the Future group. And if that means that we want to return to thoughtful, based politics and governance, that's who we are. So if you want to learn more, be informed, join us, townshipfuture.org. I thought I'd share with you some of the things we've done recently. On Saturday, we had this bike meetup with the voters at the farmers market at the Grogan's Mill shopping center. And we invited all of the candidates to attend. Here's our booth with two of our steering committee members, Bob Lilac and Ted Stanley. And we were talking to voters about answering their questions about registration, deadlines, early voting, mail-in ballots, and we had forms there for them as well. And as I said, we invited all the candidates. 6 out of the 10 candidates did come and met with voters. So you can see there's Jimmy Dotson. There's Jimmy Dotson talking to Gordy Bunch. This is a cute family that came and checked us out. Ron Keckline, and there's Dan Hannon. And here's another activity we're involved in, Adopt a Path. We have adopted a path. This is at Lake Woodlands and New Trails, and our path goes all the way up New Trails to Gosling. And this was the first day that we picked up trash, and we'll be scheduling another one in the fall. This was one beautiful evening. We gave away masks that say shop safe, shop local. And we thought that that would be a good way to support the businesses and try to encourage people to safely get out and spend some money. This was on 9/11, the 9/11 day. Our three endorsed candidates, Dan Hannan, Jimmy Dotson, and John Brown. They're with current director Ann Snyder, beloved Ann Snyder, and the fire chief and Eric Seacrest. So that was a somber and moving event, and was a nice place to be on 9/11. And there's our three candidates that we're working hard for: Jimmy Dotson, John Anthony Brown, and Dr. Dan Hannan. Okay, so let's now get to the education part of what we do. As far as incorporation, I'm going to start with a brief timeline of how we got here. And it really starts back in 1996 when Kingwood was forcibly annexed into Houston. Shortly after that, the Woodlands and Houston agreed to an annexation moratorium. And in 2007, the township was formed and we entered into the RPAs with Houston and Conroe. And by doing that, that deferred any possible annexation until 2057. So the annexation at that point was solved until 2057. A few years later, that township board initiated an incorporation study. The board and the public had no interest in incorporating at that time because of the disparate impact of absorbing the MUDs. The MUDs had and have drastically different debt rates. So that didn't go anywhere. But they did establish a procedure, an annual review, to see if there were any catastrophic changes that would require incorporation down the road. And they called that a trigger. Okay. So what is a trigger? It's basically 4 points. You ask the questions, if you have something that you think is catastrophic or a problem in the community that might be so large that you would change your form of governance, you ask yourself, could we solve the problem by ourselves? Is there something we can do to resolve the problem? If not, is there something, can we solve it by working with our neighbors or entering into contracts with others? If not, can we solve it by legislative initiatives? And if none of those things work, you ask the question, could we solve the problem by a change in government structure? And if the answer is yes, you've got your trigger. So moving on, in November of 16, Gordy Bunch was elected chairman by the incoming board. And a couple months later, the board found that the county's reluctance to stop the Woodlands Parkway extension was a trigger to start incorporation planning. But it never really was explained how incorporation could prevent the extension. But it was used as a trigger to start the planning process. That same month, the board had already hired a lobbyist to help enact legislation that would enable us to incorporate. And in June of that year, there was legislation adopted and passed that established the process for the Woodlands to incorporate. The same summer, there was another piece of legislation that was passed requiring voter approval for any annexation in counties that had populations bigger than 500,000. So of course, that's both Montgomery County and Harris County. So at that point, not only did we have the RPAs that protected us until 2057, but we also had this law that prohibited forced annexations in either Montgomery or Harris County. That same month, the board agreed to hire consultants to go ahead and do an incorporation planning study. And that fall, we had Hurricane Harvey, as you remember. At that point, Hurricane Harvey was added as a second trigger. It wasn't really explained, it sort of got fleshed out as we went along, that they thought maybe there would be something that could be done to improve flood mitigation, or that there could be some additional relief opportunities, but neither one of those things has materialized to this point. And then in February of 2018, after receiving proposals, interviews, and a lengthy selection process, Matrix was selected as the lead consultant and Novak was hired to perform limited projects. And in June of that year, the first incorporation planning report was filed, and there have been many reports since then. This is actually a list of some of the reports that were filed. For example, in law enforcement, there were 5 complete reports that were prepared by both Matrix and Novak. And then moving on, in the fall of 2017, we had the town hall meeting in September 25th at the Marriott, and some of you may have attended that meeting. And if you did, or if you've seen the video of it, you'll recognize this, the game board, the steps to incorporation. And it's listed below are the, let me see if I can move my,
Amy, you're muted.
sorry about that. Zoning or covenants, law enforcement study, and zoning and covenants, they've done nothing. They've decided just to keep the covenants and not do anything with zoning. Law enforcement study, the board has elected the hybrid model, which is not the full police department model, but it's something that the board came up with that would be a lower cost option to a full police department. The road and condition and cost, mud operations. Early on, the board indicated that they were not going to do anything with the muds. They were just going to leave them outside of the city and let them operate independently as they do now. But recently there's been some talk that decision might change. So that's something to check on. And I guess we'll have to go back to number 4 on the chart, on the game board, and pick that up. Then we had the public forum, financial analysis. There's been something of a tax rate study. And then we have community survey and a public forum. And that has not yet taken place. And there's some talk that they're not going to do a survey. A survey would be something useful to the board to have in mind when they consider whether or not to put incorporation on the ballot. And it would give them an opportunity to educate the residents about what incorporation would mean to our community, and then be able to survey to make sure that people understand what it would mean to our community. So let's see. So actually, in a couple months later in December, Matrix, the lead consultant, and the township severed their relationship. We had already paid them, or ended up paying them, over $500,000. And the other consultant, Novak, their role and scope was expanded. The following May, we had another piece of legislation passing, which reinforced the no forced annexation issue, and it included the smaller counties. So now every county in Texas is not permitted to annex unincorporated areas without the permission of the voters. And then a year later, in May of this year, we got what was intended to be the final report. The second thing here is incorporation a solution in search of a problem? And before we get into sort of the nitty gritty, I think it actually behooves us to take a look at this issue. This is actually from the Incorporation website. It's a frequently asked question. And I don't know who this person is, but somebody asked very simply, what is the problem we're trying to fix via incorporation? Said differently, what is broken and why is incorporation the fix? And I think that's a good question. The consultants did not answer that question. They sort of punted and said that the study process is intended to define the cost and service implications of incorporation. But I don't know why they didn't answer it if it's an easy question. So annexation has often been mentioned as a reason to incorporate, even as recently as today. This was the photo that was shown at the town hall meeting of the rally over in Kingwood when they were fighting their annexation. And like I said, even to this day, annexation is still being used as a scare tactic. The RPAs prohibited annexation until 2057. And then based on the legislation, there is no forced annexation in the state of Texas. And yet it was cited as a pro in that last report right here, where they list the pros and cons of incorporation. The very first word after pro is annexation. So just to reinforce, Dan Huberty is the representative from the Kingwood area. He's obviously very interested in this issue and was instrumental in getting the legislation passed. And his letter to a resident, Steve Lakey, in response to his questions, reiterates that there is no forced annexation without voter approval. And he cites both of the statutes. There was some question about whether or not the RPA would have any effect on the legislation. And basically the law provides that the voter has the right to vote on annexation after the RPA expires. And that's from the mouth of the legislator who sponsored the legislation. So, and then this is a snippet from a memo from Monty Akers, who's the township's retained attorney, summarizing the second piece of legislation, the 2019. And he said, the recent change in the law does not modify the situation that existed after the 2017 session in which unilateral annexation by Houston and Conroe was eliminated. So this confirms that as far back as 2017, we were double protected from forced annexation. This is actually a website that I created around that time because I was concerned that we were not getting good information. And I did this little legal memo, and I've included some source documents here. So feel free if you want to go to my website. It's my own personal website. It's the woodlandsincorporationfacts.org, all smushed together. And you can access the actual source documents here if you'd like. Limits to city's authority over roads inside city limits. This was the second trigger, the Woodlands Parkway extension. And I did the same thing for this. I researched it to see whether we really could, what the law was regarding roads and cities, roads in cities, roads outside of cities, what authority we would have. And I asked Mr. Buck, who is an attorney and deals more in this area, to take a look at it. And he found the Harris Road Law, County Road Law, and the Montgomery County Road Law. And basically, this case that stemmed from the Harris County Road Law, it confirms that Harris County had the authority to expand a road within the city limits of Houston. And so that means that even if we are incorporated, our roads are not 100% protected from a county or somebody else. So for example, there's no jurisdiction. We would have no jurisdiction on state or federal roads and highways inside or outside of the city boundaries. We'd have no jurisdiction on any roads outside of the boundaries of the city. So if you're talking about extending a road beyond our boundaries, like the Woodlands Parkway goes beyond 2978, we would have as a city no jurisdiction outside of our boundaries. So, and to summarize, based on the Harris County and Montgomery County road laws, a city's jurisdiction is not guaranteed, and that's the Piney Point case. So the next disaster was Hurricane Harvey. It devastated the region, as you recall. It was a horrible event. And at the time, it was argued that an incorporated woodlands would have better flood control than the township. Our enabling legislation actually allows us to provide some drainage mitigation now, but we don't use that. And this issue seems to be more a matter of will and collaborative effort rather than authority. I'm not going to go into this issue any more than that because we are going to have a third township issues devoted specifically to water, and we have some folks who are expert in that field, and they're going to come talk about it. The other thing that was said was that if we were incorporated, we would have more access to flood relief if we were a city. But unfortunately, that is really not true. This is another frequently asked question on the Incorporation Study website, and it's clear from the answer here that the city would have the same ability to get relief as the township and no more. Okay, then we had another calamity, the pandemic, and an unjustifiable demand for $21 million in CARES Act funds. And you may recall that CARES Act was the huge bill passed by Congress. Some of the monies came directly to counties and cities, more than 500,000 in Texas. So both Harris County and Montgomery County got CARES Act money directly from the Treasury. And it's their responsibility then to take care of the cities within their county that are less than 500,000 in population, and also the unincorporated areas. There was some confusion about that. This was the letter from the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House. And in that letter, it made clear on May 11th that counties are expected to use the funds to address expenses incurred by incorporated areas with a population of less than 500 that are located in those counties, as well as the needs of residents in unincorporated areas of the county. So that seems pretty clear. And then the next day, the township got this letter from our Senator Brandon Creighton, and he made clear these funds are expected to address expenses incurred by incorporated areas as well as unincorporated areas. So very clear. And then he cautioned, first, it's critical that each jurisdiction works together to address expenses that cross jurisdictions. So you gotta work together. Second, just like with other disaster relief, the federal government requires strict bookkeeping. You've got to keep receipts, track all expenditures, and make sure you know what's eligible for these funds. Only eligible expenses can be reimbursed. And for example, something that is not reimbursable is lost revenues from COVID. And out of everything that we've suffered financially in the township, that would be the greatest. Not so much with the eligible expenses. And then there's a link in his letter to this guidance that says, please work with your county for CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is what caused the confusion. The chairman got, I don't know how, either email or fax or something, a letter, this worksheet from the Speaker of the House's office, and he provided that to staff. And what this is, it's looks like to be a worksheet. There's no heading on it for Montgomery County. And it's a calculation of funding. This is how much Montgomery County got, almost $106 million to distribute within the county and use within the county. And that's on a per capita basis of $174.49. This chart is the amount if the county distributed the total amount received at that per capita dollar amount. So if they distributed it to the cities, Conroe would get $15 million. Cleveland would get $6,000. So it based on population. It doesn't say that that's the way it should be, but it says if the county decided to do it, that's what the dollars would be. And this chart over here is the second piece of it, is if the county decided to split the total funding and give each city $87.24 per capita, this is the amount that they would get. So Conroe would get $7.6 million. Cleveland would get $3,000. And again, that's not mandated. It was just basically a mathematical calculation. The chairman looked down here and saw the woodlands and had nothing next to it, and made the assumption that that meant that the woodlands was not entitled to any money. That is not a good assumption based on everything that I just showed you. The money is to go to both unincorporated and incorporated areas in the county. And this makes it clear a county recipient is not required to transfer funds to smaller cities within the county's borders. Each county has discretion to use it as long as it's for eligible purposes. And yet in June, the chairman asked our consultant Novak to place the CARES Act, use that as an example of a pro. In other words, if we were a city, we would have been eligible for close to $21 million. And that he asked the consultants to put that in the report, modify the report and put that in there. We haven't seen the modified report yet. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. He also referenced, because of the pandemic, that we should maybe put in the report that we could have a public health department. And in other words, have a city public health department, a county public health department, a state public health department, and a federal public health department. And the response of the consultant was, well, you could, that's one thing that you could do as a city, but they haven't made any allowances for that. There's no money in the budget to do that at this point. So that's nothing that anybody had ever talked about before. So then it was not until mid-July, July 17th, that the township then did send a letter to Judge Keogh requesting COVID funds. But it does not appear that they had requested specifically with eligible expenses in receipts and all that attached to collect money. However, the letter does admit that it's not, they understand that it's not mandatory. Those distributions that we talked about earlier were not mandatory. And in this letter, the township is asking for basically what would it be equivalent to $55 a person, and that works out to be about, I think, about $6 million. But again, it doesn't matter what you're eligible, what you have to have eligible expenses. It's not just a big pot of money that you can grab. You have to apply for some of those funds with eligible expenses. Okay, and now the most recent is the Mitchell Island Land Use Authority has come up as an issue. I think people are still figuring out a little bit about this. I'm not the expert on this, but we do have two different opinions here that were expressed in this Villager article The Chairman Bunch, said that if the Woodlands were an incorporated municipality, he would have control over developments that the township does not today. And John Powers, who is obviously, you know, the Assistant General Manager, said that Mitchell Island is encumbered with Woodlands Community Association covenants and is subject to the DSC authority. The replat review and approval process is a multi-step process and involves multiple agencies. In addition to the City of Houston review, Montgomery County and DSC must also approve. So it sounds like there will be local involvement. The DSC and Montgomery County are both going to be involved in determining whether or not the land use is appropriate in this case. So this, just to sort of summarize, is incorporation looking for a problem to solve? So we've got forced annexation. Did we need incorporation to solve that issue? No. We worked with our neighbors. We had the moratorium, the RPAs. We worked with our legislators and got legislation passed to prohibit forced annexation. The Woodlands Parkway extension, did we need incorporation to solve that issue? No. We worked with our good neighbor, our county commissioner, and the extension was taken off the thoroughfare plan, and the road was rerouted south of where the Woodlands Parkway would cross over. What about Hurricane Harvey relief funds? Did we need incorporation to get relief funds? No, the additional FEMA money would have been available to the Woodlands either as a city or as a township. What about the $21 million for COVID-19 relief? These are all things that have been given as reasons to incorporate. Did we need that to incorporate? No. We're not entitled to $21 million as either a city or as a township because we don't have $21 million worth of expenses. And then the Mitchell land use, residential density change. Do we need incorporation to solve it? Not based on what John Powers said. That we have a strong DSC, and Montgomery County will also look at that and have approval rights regarding the change of the designated change of land use. So it's not clear we have a problem that needs to be resolved, but everybody can look at that for yourselves and see what you think. Maybe there's something there that you feel rises to a level of a drastic change of governance. But even if we had found a problem to solve, or even if you found a problem to solve, there are still some issues with moving forward on incorporation. Unreliable information is presented from time to time as the truth. The chairman has consistently discounted the value of law enforcement provided by the counties. He misstates the number of Montgomery County Sheriff's officers assigned to the Woodlands because of our status as an unincorporated part of the county, and that's called the levy officers. And I've heard him do it many times. Most recently, Monday night, he asked the question, how many levy Montgomery County Sheriff's officers do we have? And he gave the answer 12. He said that for the most part, we, let's see if I can. For the most part, we already fund county services, is what he said Monday night. And then he said that they pay for 12 Montgomery County Sheriff's officers and we pay for 88. So how many levy officers are there? Well, according to the January report of our consultants, based on 2019 data, the report was January 2020, the county funded law enforcement officers are 22.5, not 12. And this is the contract that was recently been renegotiated with the county for law enforcement, the enhanced law enforcement, and the transition agreement, which was all on the same contract. And this agreement also references the 22 direct cost personnel. That's the levy officers. This is a little bit older report. Remember I told you we have 5 reports for law enforcement and they differ. They're somewhat different from here to there. But this one actually showed 25.5 personnel that are paid through the county levy taxes. And it tells you what ranks they are: captain, lieutenants, detectives, patrol deputies, and then some administrative assistant, 4 jailers, and 1.5 civilian clerks. So the chairman consistently discounts the value of law enforcement provided by the counties. He fails to factor in the large number of specialty support, administrative, and ancillary personnel that are necessary for a functioning law enforcement agency. And you can see here that this report from October 2018 actually says that the following services are offered countywide through a county property tax levy or mutual aid. So things like communications, detectives, canines, SWAT, crime scene investigation, auto theft task force, hostage negotiation. There's some others too, but those are the ones they list. This more recent report gives more detail on those kinds of folks that you don't necessarily see, like you see the ones that are driving around. And you can read through their general investigations, major squad, narcotics, professional standards, victim services, investigations, administration, support services of all kind, lab, records, animal control, fleet management. You got to take care of the cars, the finance. And this is sort of the breakdown of those that are paid by the township versus those that are paid by Montgomery County. And here, if you total everybody up, it's 237, and the city would pay 126 new employees and continue to pay 111 that we pay for right now. So we're actually more than doubling the personnel. It's not just an increase in personnel, but also increase in equipment, vehicles, training, HR, IT, legal, facilities. So no, we don't fund county services for the most part in law enforcement. And as far as the roads, maintenance, and construction, we do nothing on that. That is going to be 100% new expense for us, and that is that's a large sum. To give you some comparison, I said 237 total for a police department. That's for a police department. If we were to do a police department, because I can't imagine that we would incorporate and not eventually have a police department. So that would be the largest department, overtaking Parks and Rec at 212 and the fire department at 170. There are many other areas of unreliable info, the law and laws that have been ignored, the annexation, the road laws we've talked about. There's other legal opinions that turn out not to be indisputable. For example, I've heard many times it said that the county will issue bonds for our city roads, and that is disputable. The board chose to disregard HR Green. They're the the road maintenance and construction folks. They made recommendations on the longer term costs of maintaining our roads. The board disregarded those. And they have chosen to take the lowest cost options in many, many cases, which is eventually going to sacrifice services or require hefty tax increases once we're incorporated to reach that level of service that we expect. This is a flyer that was passed out in November by the Texas Patriots PAC. That is the group that supports the leaders on the board right now, and you can see that their commentary echoes what we just talked about. They say here that the county only gives us 9 officers, and again, that's not true. It's 22 or 25. And down here, they say that the outlook on the tax rate could even be lower than currently. So they are telling people that if we incorporate, we could actually lower our taxes. And I think anybody who thinks about it will know that that can't be true. Okay, so there's that. Then what about playing games with costs and hiding the true cost of incorporation? So this is, these studies are academic studies. The consultants, they do the best that they can, but I think it's good to reality test what you come up with. And this is a chart that shows from last year. I haven't updated it for the very most recent tax that we just passed, but this is our Woodlands property tax here. And these are the 9 peer cities that the consultants recommended as peer cities to the township. The township adopted the first 4. You can see they're actually the lowest of the 9, but all 9 were recommended by the consultants as peer cities. And you can see that our peer cities tax rate, property tax rate, is 2 or even 3 times what ours is. So we do have a pretty low tax. This came off the Conroe website. This was reflecting 2019 taxes, but even though it's a little dated, it does give you an idea of the other property tax rates in Montgomery County compared to ours. Remember, we're 2.4 at that time. And then some of these others, which we had on the other chart as well. So the township is creatively finding ways to avoid raising the initial year's property tax rate, because that goes on the ballot and that has to be approved by the voters along with incorporation in order to incorporate. So there are things like $7 million in franchise fees that will be assessed once we become a city. That's not going to be on your tax bill. You're going to pay that to the utility, and it's a pass-through from the utility to the township. There's been some talk about discontinuing the trash collection through the township. And instead of paying for your trash through your property tax, you would get a monthly or an annual bill for trash. They have not honored their promise to estimate what the expenses will be 5 years out to get a more realistic view of our taxes and what they will look like at maturity. They've gone out 4 years. Some people argue that you really should go out 10 years to see what a mature city is going to look like and how it would act. The first few years is really mostly transition. They did not include any legal liabilities for personnel and facilities, especially I'm thinking of law enforcement and roads. And we have seen some very large, expensive lawsuits lately involving law enforcement and also involving accidents on roads that were alleged to have been unsafe. So there should be money in the budget for those unfortunate circumstances. There's also nothing in the budget for contingencies. And those of you who are engineers or project managers know when you do a project like this, there's always contingencies, either an overall contingency for the project or within each category. And then they are artificially deflating property taxes in the first few years by hoarding reserves and by using those reserves instead of property taxes in the first few years. And then once those are gone, the truer picture of the property tax level will emerge. So when I say hoarding reserves, there are more than $24 million in specifically incorporation related reserves. And there are other reserve funds where the board could take reserves and apply it towards incorporation if they chose to do so. This is a worksheet from the budget task force when in the spring, when things were rough in terms of the sales tax going way down because nobody was out of their house, nobody was shopping. And there was a, good planning, which is what do we do? What should we do? If there's a 10% loss, a 20% loss, a 30% loss, 40 or a 50% loss in the sales tax, here's a contingency plan. And you can see they've got reductions in general expenditures. They've got some unbudgeted sources of income up here, which as a result of COVID, either they're getting money or they're not using money. And then the general fund reduction, and then they delayed, deferred some capital projects for this year and also actually for next year. So they did those things to try to cut expenses because of the loss of revenues. And then when you come down here to the reserves, you can see that they did not take anything out of reserves if it were a 10% loss. If there were 20% loss, they took it out of the bond redemption and the contingency reserve and on down here. Well, the incorporation reserve funds are here to utilize monies pre-funded to capital replacement reserve in anticipation of incorporation, 2 million. Utilize monies pre-funded to operation reserve in anticipation of incorporation, 2 million. And then utilize the Grogan's Mill property site plan. That's the site for City Hall, 5 million and change. And then the actual incorporation reserve fund is 15.4 million. And you can see those last two, they don't, even if we had a 50% loss in sales tax, they would not touch those. And the other two, the $2 million, they wouldn't touch unless it got to be a 50% reduction in sales tax. And this just shows you can read it a little better. So more than 24 million in taxes has already been collected from us. We've already paid that money. It's sitting in an account somewhere waiting for incorporation. You know, this may be the reason that the chairman and the vice chairman were so adamant last year about lowering the property tax last year. They wanted to raise it. They didn't want to lower it. They had 6 hearings, remember? And at one point, Director Reeser stormed out of the meeting, and he claimed that one of the reasons they rushed unlawfully to appoint a new member to the board was because he did not want to be in that position again, where he did not have 5 votes to raise the taxes. To raise taxes, you have to have a supermajority, and he didn't have it. And so he was not going to let that happen again. But they did all of that just to overtax us to fill up these reserve funds. And this year, when we did have revenue issues, they didn't have any trouble lowering the taxes. Here's just the overall property tax. You can see we're pretty steady, but there's these tiny little jiggles up and down right there. C is lack of respect for public input and transparency in the process. So we were overtaxed for incorporation. And more importantly, with no sign from us that that was the path that we chose. They put all this money in incorporation, and the public had never spoken that this is what we wanted to do. In fact, 2016 was the last time that the question was even asked. And at that time, 83% of the residents did not favor incorporation if it meant raising taxes. And we all know that it will require raising taxes. The board did not ask for our opinion on the resident survey in 2018. And at this time, they don't plan to conduct an incorporation survey as was promised before putting it on the ballot. It's one of those little squares on the game board, but it's not in the plan for the future. So why not survey the residents, see how they feel about pushing further to incorporate? We have likely spent over $2 million on studies and planning. We need to seek and circulate accurate facts and then take a survey, take a pulse of the people, let the people talk. The incorporation process was designed to be transparent, but it allowed little opportunity for public input. Materials were consistently handed out in the middle of meetings with no opportunity to review. The public was denied meaningful legal analysis, and the board chose to assert an attorney-client privilege, denying residents the right to see the basis of board's decisions, even when the decision were discussed in public settings. These requests were sent to the Attorney General, where they died. Long reports were altered. I mentioned, 5 reports in the law enforcement, 90-page reports with no redlining. Lots of numbers, lots of text, and no redlining to show where there were changes from one report to the next. And frankly, there have been too many discussions and decisions made in closed meetings. The Incorporation Task Force clearly discusses and decides issues out of the public view based on their statements in public session. And the Budget Task Force that recommended cutting expenditures and scheduled capital projects this year and next, in lieu of spending even a portion of the incorporation reserves, they met in private. And of course, the discussion and decision about whether to place incorporation on the ballot that recently took place in executive session. We know that because of the hot mic, and we know that because the only statement upon return when the agenda item came up was, quote, "This issue was deferred." And the only place it was not deferred in open session. The only place it could have been deferred was in the prior executive session. The residents would like to know what the board members' thoughts are, what their votes are on issues like this that are so important. But it's all a game. Here's the game. You see it right there. Listed below are the steps that the Township Board will consider prior to placing incorporation on a ballot. But did they really consider each of these things? And are we going to get a survey? The costs of the 4-year push to incorporate. There are many costs. Some of them are financial, like the $1.6 million documented that will be spent by the end of this year. Plus, on top of that, billings from a law firm and billings from an attorney lobbyist that were not disclosed because of attorney-client privilege, and plus unaccounted for embedded costs. There are other costs besides just what we've paid for our consultants. There's been distraction by the board, the staff, and the public without the bandwidth to attend to other issues. There's been inattention to some of the economic development projects that could have been developed to bring more revenue into the township without raising property taxes and to keep our community vibrant and lively. We've had soured relationships with elected officials with whom we've previously enjoyed good relations. We've had 4 years of uncertainty to be followed by many years of upheaval if we actually do incorporate. And sadly, members of our community are being pitted against each other, the young families and the seniors on the tax freeze issue. And now, more recently, those in the old neighborhoods and those in the new neighborhoods regarding the recent interest in absorbing the MUDs. That's not our community. We do not want to be divided. We want to be united. So incorporation, a solution in search of a problem? I don't know. You tell me. So I can take, if you would like to chat, any questions, if anybody has any questions, feel free to chat a question. Walter, I don't know if you can open up the airwaves or if you want to.
I can't do anything. My computer is frozen.
I think I was able to open Dan, isn't that who you said you wanted opened?
Well, there's Jimmy is also on, so you might
Let
open
me see
him.
if I can.
Need to upgrade him to panelist.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that worked. Okay. Do either of our candidates have anything they wish to say tonight? Or you don't have to, just if you'd like to.
This is Dan Hannon, and I want to say thank you to the to Township Future for this presentation. Amy, excellent job. And I'll just come alongside and say that incorporation is not on the ballot, yet it is on the ballot. Incorporation is a referendum because the people who will be elected to serve on this upcoming township board will determine where the board will go and the decisions that will have to be made. And I know that the gentleman that my opponent, Vice Chairman Reiser, has made it clear of his vote to raise taxes and his intent to incorporate. And so I'm grateful for this information. And I've said all along, the township is something that should be replicated in our state rather than eliminated.
Okay, thank you. So,
Jimmy,
Jimmy, did you want to say anything?
Yes, oh, sorry, I was muted. I'm like Dan, I want to thank you for this additional information, because the more information I get that I can trust, the more I'm resilient in making sure that when I get to that board, the citizens' voices has to be heard. And in my opinion, I know that they can muzzle them by having all of the secret meetings, or I should say the executive sessions. But to me, the one thing that should speak louder than anything else is the citizen survey. And if I'm on that board, every time I hear the word incorporation comes up, and if I'm within Robert's Rules of Orders, I'm going to be making sure that there's a citizen survey, because that will tell us exactly what the citizens want and not have to depend on numbers that people don't all quite understand. But you have made it very clear here tonight that our citizens need to have a voice on that board. And thank you so much.
Thank you for what you're doing. Anthony, I don't know, Anthony posted a question on chat. Has anyone addressed that the utility easements are owned by Howard Hughes? The directors seem to be assuming that Howard Hughes will turn over the easements to the new city. I doubt that would happen. Let me see if I can get Anthony to talk.
Amy?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's relating to the franchise fees, the $7 million that they think they're going to collect in franchise fees.
Right.
As I understand it, the franchise fee is collected by the utilities and paid to whoever it is that owns the easements that the utilities use to get the services to your home. And those easements are owned by Howard Hughes. I mean, because they owned all the land when they sold the land or deeded it to the county, they retained those utility easements. And I mean, we pay some very small fees now on our utilities that go to Howard Hughes, and they've been very, in the past, they've been very protective of that. I say Howard Hughes, it used to be, of course, the development company. And they've always been very protective of that information as to how much they collect and what they do with it. I think there's a requirement that they use part of it for parks or something like that. I'm not sure. But if the township's going to get it, and I may be wrong on this, but I thought sure that if the township's going to get any of that, that the utility easements would have to be turned over to them.
Amy,
And
is Walter.
Yeah, Walter.
We're actually talking about two things. Howard Hughes did reserve, it was actually the Woodlands Corporation, Woodlands Development Company, now Howard Hughes, reserved easements for utilities when they platted the woodlands. And we pay a franchise fee now for the use of those easements by the utilities. The franchise fee that Amy was talking about is actually a state law. If we were a city, we would have to pay a pass-through franchise fee that would flow to the utility and then to the township. I guess it's under the theory that these utilities are using public easements for their lines and sewer pipes and water pipes. Of course, which they're not in the woodlands. They're using private easements held by the Howard Hughes Corporation right now. So I think the bottom line is we'd be paying two franchise fees.
Right, that's what I was just thinking. We'd be paying a double.
Mandated franchise fee plus the franchise fee we currently pay that goes into the pocket of Howard Hughes for use of the easements they retained for utility purposes.
Oh,
So
okay.
that might need a little more research. That's a good point. That's a good point, Anthony and Walter. Okay. So let's see. The tax freeze. Okay, so those, and in number 6, Cheryl and Jeff had a question about the last point on this screen, number 6. Those are two different issues. The first issue is a proposed, it's a proposed proposal that if we were to incorporate, City Council could, if they chose to, freeze the seniors' taxes, property taxes at a certain level. And that, thereafter, if, appraisals went up, theirs would stay at the same level. I think that's how it works. But in other words, it's a benefit to the seniors. But whenever you give a benefit to one part of the tax-paying population, it means everybody else has to contribute to make up that revenue loss. So it's a little bit of a conflict then between the seniors and young families. So that's what the tax freeze, that's what I was talking about with the tax freeze. The other issue is very similar to the issue that basically put the first incorporation study on ice, and that is absorbing the MUDs into the city to be a municipal utility. And if we were to do that, they would bring their debt with them. And the newer neighborhoods like Creekside and I believe it's MUD 47 have very high debt because they're new and they haven't worked their debt down. And because it's newer, it probably was more expensive than the folks that put their infrastructure in 30 years ago. So if in fact the MUDs got absorbed and everybody had to throw their debt in together, people who are living in MUDs with no debt or very little debt would be subsidizing those who live in the newer neighborhoods. That's what that means. Does that answer the question well enough? Okay, she says yes, thanks. Okay. I don't think I see any other questions. Walter, do you have anything you want to say? You're pretty knowledgeable about this issue as well.
No, but you're exactly right, Amy, as we discussed before you went on the air in your title, a solution looking for a problem, question mark. I would have replaced the question mark with a period. It is a solution, definitely a solution looking for a problem, and there ain't no problem that Incorporation will solve in the woodlands.
Yep. Okay, let's see. Cheryl and Jeff, do you still have something on your mind? Dan says you have a hand up, so just checking to make sure if there's anything else. Yeah, for those who, let me see if I can get, I can, not as good at this as Walter is. Hang on.
Need to upgrade Cheryl to a panelist.
Yeah, I just did. See if she can get on now. I'm not sure if it's Cheryl or Jeff, but
Need to unmute.
Hello, can you hear us?
yes, there you are. Hi.
Great, thanks. This is Cheryl and Jeff. We're both.
Okay.
And first of all, I just want to say thanks so much for providing these meetings. This is very informative. I've lived in the Woodlands for 25 years, and Jeff has joined me the last 7. And early on, when the first study took place, one of the concerns that I had was exactly this item number 6 about those of us who live in older neighborhoods, longer term residents, and that having to absorb the debt brought by new MUDs. It wasn't explained as well as you just did, so thanks for that. But that has been a question that has lingered with me all this time. I guess now my new question after hearing your presentation tonight, which I'm very appreciative of, is how do we, aside from, venues like this, how do we get this information to more residents so that they truly understand what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think, I mean, this presentation will go online. It'll go on our website and on our Facebook, which is where most people, can find it. So, there's that, but people have to have the initiative to go get it, look at it, and, take a look at it. I would just encourage everybody to talk with, your circles, wherever you have your circles, the neighborhood, the, school, church, work, friends, the gym, wherever you see people, and you feel like it's somebody who might be interested in learning a little bit more about it, just raise an issue with them and start talking about it, because it's a complicated issue. It's not just a, single, there's so many facets to it that you can start a conversation on, a different topic for every day in a month, But I think getting people talking about it, thinking about it, is going to be the key. I know we have 2 candidates, Jimmy and Dan, who are out there trying to do just that. And, sometimes during a election season, people are more interested in listening to issues than they are the rest of the year. So it may be a good time to start doing that.
Great, thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you for coming. Okay, I think, make sure I'm not, yeah, I think we're done. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I hope you learned something, and hope we made you think about something you hadn't thought about before. We will go ahead and post this on the Facebook and on our our website. So if you know of people who might be interested in listening, or even just looking at the slides, it'll be available for you. So look for Dan and look for Jimmy out on the campaign trail. Give them encouragement, tell them hello, and find them some voters. Okay. Good night, everybody.